Cole Eiserman has gone from the consensus number 2 overall pick in the upcoming draft to maybe not even in the top 10. What is up with that? We're going to discuss on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. You can also find us on SiriusXM, as well as the game tomorrow night. You can find that at SiriusXM with Bob Gallagher. Does a great job. Just type Blue Jackets into the SXM app. So today we're doing another prospect profile because of scheduling issues. We are going to be talking about Mike Babcock. We're going to talk about Jarmo Kekalainen tomorrow and some more of his flaws as a GM. But today I've got Tony Ferrari, who's a really, really great prospect expert, friend of the show, does a great job. And we're going to be talking about Cole Eiserman, who's a really interesting prospect because he was a guy that people were looking at as, is he going to challenge Celebrini for first overall? Is he going to go second overall? And the more you see of him, the more prospect experts are kind of like, oh, I don't know. I would maybe draft him in the top 15, but maybe not the top 10. So I'm going to find out what's up with that because I'm curious and confused by this player. So I'm just going to get into my conversation with Tony because he is much smarter than I am. Every year with the draft, I feel like there's a guy that everyone has ranked super highly at the start of the season, and then he either, due to injury or due to having a historic cold streak, just kind of plummets down the rankings. And so at the start of the season, we were talking about Cole Eiserman as a potential second overall pick. He was a guy that I was like, right, I'm going to have to remember this name when I do my prospect stuff, kind of in February, March time. And now, every time I ask someone if they want to talk about him, they're like, I guess. So eventually, Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News said yes. So we're going to talk about Cole Eiserman today. And Tony, what's up with this kid? Why is everyone soured on him so fast?
Well, I remember a conversation I was having with Will Scouch of Scouching.ca in the summer and a few other people, and we were talking and we said, I don't know if Cole Eiserman is quite as good as everyone's thinking. The goal scoring has been historic. His ability to play with James Haggins has been great. There's a lot going into his game, though, that I'm not quite sure is going to be translatable. I'm not quite sure, unless he takes a couple big steps coming into the year, we're going to see that second overall player that a lot of people think. Fast forward a few months, everyone else is starting to see what we thought in the summer, and there hasn't been that step. I think goal scoring wise, this kid's absolutely unbelievable. He's got 34 goals in 32 games already early this year. He's not quite on pace to break the record that everyone thought he would of Cole Caulfield's 72, if I'm not mistaken, it is. But he's going to score a lot of goals for that NTDB team. The issue is everything else in his game still looks a little bit wonky. When you're drafting at second, third, fourth, fifth, even 10th overall, you get concerned that a guy's a little bit of a one-trick pony, and I think that's where everyone's kind of starting to get concerned with Cole Eiserman. He's a very, very good shooter. Unfortunately, we're not seeing it that much at even strength. We're seeing a ton of it on the power play. He's a guy that will go to the net, bang in some greasy goals, does a lot of things to fill the back of the net, but everything else kind of sets him apart as a question mark. I've seen him try to throw hits. I've seen him try to stay up with the play. It's not that his skating isn't good. I think it's just his pacing sometimes isn't very good. Defensively, sometimes he's not even in the zone. There's a lot of issues with his off-puck game unless he's an off-puck shooter. So I think Cole Eiserman's a very, very good goal scorer. I'm not quite sure if he's quite the hockey player everyone thought he was in the summer, though.
Yeah. There's kind of a couple of comparisons that immediately spring to mind here, and I might be way off base with both of them, but I'm wondering if we would be having the same conversations about Cole Eiserman if he was like 4 inches shorter. There's a very kind of Jordan DeMay vibe to his like how scouts talk about him that kind of concerns me a little bit. And the other one is the conversation that I think you and I had a couple of years ago about Brad Lambert versus Joaquin Kamel, and how one of them was scoring goals basically at will, but his underlying stats were horrible. And then Brad Lambert was playing really well, but the puck wasn't going in. And one of those guys dropped like a stone in the rankings. And so like neither of those things are like quite comparable to what I'm hearing about Eiserman, but like that's what I immediately think of when you talk about this kid being like a one-dimensional goal scorer.
No, I think the Kamel one specifically is a really good example. I think that's a guy that was running a super high shooting percentage, playing pro hockey in Finland. And while it's not a direct comparable, because Cole Eiserman is playing U18 and USHL hockey, playing against some NCAA competition, it's not quite the perfect comparable, but it's very similar stylistically, I think, as players. I think the shot is unbelievable when he gets time to wind up or unload a wicked wrist shot or snapshot. That puck has a good chance of beating the goalie and going to the back of the net. The problem is, like we talked about with Kamel a couple of years ago, like I've talked about with Eiserman all year, sometimes he needs someone to do a lot of the work for him. And I think when he's playing on a line with James Haggins, when he's playing with guys like Teddy Stiga, Kamil Bednarik, they're doing a lot of those things in terms of transporting the puck up ice, passing the puck to him in the slot, getting the puck off the boards or on the forecheck. I think that's where the comparison does hold true. And much like Kamel, I think he wants to be a physical player. And I think Kamel wanted to be a physical player. I remember when I talked to him in his draft year, he was like, yeah, I like throwing hits. And when I do connect with somebody, it just feels good to lay that hit, knowing you're putting yourself into the game in that way. And Cole Eiserman certainly tries to do that. Much like Kamel, though, I think sometimes the hits are mistimed. There are times where I remember one play specifically where Eiserman's coming down the boards in the offensive zone, trying to level a defender as they're trying to break out. And the defender just kind of sidesteps him, and then Eiserman throws his elbow up, still misses the guy, ends up in the offensive zone corner, and the team's breaking out, and he's getting up off the ice and goes for a line change. Completely takes himself out of the play. And it's just these little things like that I go, okay, he wants to be physical. He wants to engage in the game that way, but he's not quite doing it properly. And I think that's going to be something he has to learn to do, because the shot can't be the only thing, unfortunately, for him.
In a minute, we're going to get back to my conversation with Tony about Cole Eiserman, but first I'm going to tell you all about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. They've got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you're going to find exactly what you're looking for every single time. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is also guaranteed to fit your ride, or you're going to get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. They've got the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home a win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Do you think this is a case of he's probably going to get to the next level? So he's committed to, I think, Boston University in the fall. Do you think he's going to get there and have a bit of a kind of a, not necessarily a crisis, but a realization of he probably can't continue to coast on this shot?
Maybe, but the shot is really good. And I think at the NCAA level, it is a little bit lower. It's a lower pace than the NHL or even the AHL. And I think he could find success there still. I think if he's playing with a guy that has high-end transporting ability and plays that transition skating offensive playmaker game, he can still succeed. And I think even at the NHL level, there's that opportunity for him to do that. It's just, how high are you drafting a guy that has to constantly be in the perfect situation for him? And that's kind of my question mark around his game.
Yeah. So would you consider him kind of like a, so I always kind of tend to put prospects in kind of two distinct boxes, like first round prospects, and it's guys that like can lead a line, and then you've got like support guys, glue guys. Do you see him as like a glue guy, or is he maybe glue guy's not quite the right word for it, but like, is he a player that is going to have to be surrounded by talent to succeed?
Yes. I think the terms I use are driver and passenger.
Yes.
And I think that Cole Eiserman is a elite passenger when he's at his best. And I think when you're an elite passenger, you can make a really good career out of it. I mean, there's a ton of guys across the NHL that have done that. But is he going to be a Mike Hoffman, or is he going to be a guy that's a much higher end passenger like a Jake Gensel? A guy that can kind of play with that star and really be an impact player. And that's my worry is, are we getting that guy that can kind of make a difference and score a ton of goals and be this offensive force, putting up 40 goals and 25 assists and ends up with 65 points, but 40 of them are goals. So it looks really, really good. Or are we getting a guy that maybe flashes that in his best season, but more likely settles in as a 25 goal scorer and 15 assists? And that's it's a little bit too low of a total and output that you'd want to spend on a guy that's in the top 10. So it still kind of concerns me, but the finishing ability really is high end. So I understand teams' intrigues. With that said, for me, there's just, I look at this draft class and I go, okay, well, here's a guy, and there's a lot of guys with red flags, but here's a guy that I don't worry about the red flag as much. Here's the guy that I know his skating may be a little slow, but he does everything else so well, and he's extremely smart. So the red flags that Eiserman has just kind of stand out a bit more than a lot of the other guys in that second, third tier prospects in this draft.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you have him kind of on your board? And then where do you think he'll go? I imagine those two answers are very different.
Yeah, they're probably a little bit different. Right now, he's sitting at, I think, 13 or 14 on my board. That finishing ability, like I said, is absolutely unreal. Like, if Eiserman ends up in the NHL and he has a 45, even challenging a 50-goal season, I'm not going to be completely shocked. And that's why NHL teams want to draft this kid. His shot is unreal. If he can find a way to use it a bit more consistently at 5-on-5, he has that chance to be that elite goal scorer. But right now, I kind of have him right on that outside of that top 10. I expect him to go in the top 10, though. I think NHL teams are kidding themselves if they think they're responsible. And when they see a guy that can score 40 goals, possibly, they're going to be really, really intrigued. So I think he probably goes in the top 10, even though I have him a little bit lower than that.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of talked about the last time we did a profile with Caden Lindstrom, is that NHL GMs love when a guy is big. They also love when a guy can score goals at will. And
yeah,
they can kind of like, well, we can teach him everything else, but we'll take this. And honestly, it feels like kind of a Blue Jackets-esque pick in that they're like, okay, we're going to draft for skill, and everything else will be figured out along the way. And I don't think Cole Eiserman is kind of comparable to a Kent Johnson type player, but that's kind of what they did with Kent Johnson, is they looked at this kid who has incredible hands, but is maybe lacking in some of the other aspects of his game. And they were like, we'll draft him for the hands and we'll figure everything else out. Is that kind of a similar-ish story that'll happen with Eiserman, do you think? Is that a team will be like, right, we're going to draft him because he can score goals and we'll figure everything else out?
Yeah, I think that's what's going to end up happening. I think he's a left winger right now. Looking at the Blue Jackets lineup, maybe he doesn't play with a guy like Johnny Gaudreau, obviously, but you put him on a line with a guy like Adam Fantilli, who can drive play, is such an elite play driver. I think that's where you find value. I think you find value if he's with a guy like a Caden Lindstrom, like we talked about before. Likely getting those two are not going to happen in the same draft, but that's the kind of player you need to have him with. I look at this Blue Jackets lineup down the middle. Could he fit with a Cole Sillinger? I think maybe that's a bad fit because I think both of them lean more towards goal scorers. But Cole Sillinger is coming a long way, I think, and that's an intriguing mix as well. But I think long-term, if he does end up on the Blue Jackets, you hope he can play with Fantilli, because Fantilli does everything that he doesn't. And Fantilli still has the shooting ability. He still deserves respect and draws respect as a shooter, which could open Cole Eiserman up even more. So I think while it's probably a big investment and it's a lot of hope that he can play with Fantilli, that's kind of the mindset you would have to have if that's the player you end up choosing.
Going to finish up my conversation with Tony in just a minute, but first I'm going to tell you all about Camino Consulting. How would you like to get to know someone better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another better prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big, ongoing fights. After providing more than 20 years of service to small and mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is offering a new digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over as well as you'd hoped? Get the Couples and Family Online Seminar for 25% off for the month of February using the discount code LOCKEDON. Again, that is discount code LOCKEDON for 25% off for the rest of the month at CaminoConsulting.ca, or mention Locked On when reaching out to it for a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Once again, CaminoConsulting.ca, discount code LOCKEDON for 25% off the month of February. Yeah, for sure. I know my good friend over at Locked On Sharks, JD Young, did hashtag find Eklund a friend draft profiles a couple of years ago, and I would not dare steal his bit in public, but I have kind of been thinking find Fantilli a friend to myself. And obviously one of those friends is probably going to be Gavin Brindley, who's already in the system, but they do need another winger on that line. So I wonder if this draft is going to be about getting that final piece for the top 6 that, you know, in 2 years or so, you've got, you know, Fantilli, Johnson, Sillinger, someone like Eiserman, maybe Chinikov if he keeps developing, Marchenko if he keeps developing. Like, that's not it. That doesn't sound like a terrible top 6 to me.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a big thing there with Gavin Brindley coming in the system as well. I think he's the kind of player you want opposite of a guy like Cole Eiserman. Brindley plays with all of the pace, all of the vigor, all of the motor that you want. Him and Fantilli have chemistry together, so that's obviously a nice little combination there as well. And Brindley plays with so much energy. He's that guy that will go get the puck in the corner, even though he's a smaller player. He's that guy that will play hard defensively. He'll play at both ends of the ice. He can fly up the ice in transition. Him and Fantilli can lead the rush. And then that opens up a Cole Eiserman for being that third guy, that trailer, that off-wing guy, the off-puck shooter. That kind of boosts his game up a little bit. So with that combination in mind, that could be an interesting mix. Is it like I said, isn't necessarily the guy I target at 4? Maybe not, but man, that could be quite the combination, quite the trio if you get that together.
Yeah, for sure. Eiserman's an interesting name because, like I said, everyone I've kind of talked to about him have been like, oh, he keeps falling down the draft rankings. So I do wonder, is he a guy that maybe drops enough that, I don't know. The Blue Jackets only have 1 first-round pick at the minute, but if they manage to get another one in the like 16 to 17 range, that might be a guy that they could target then if they could. The Blue Jackets are really good at taking advantage of players falling through the cracks. Mm-hmm. I feel like we saw it with Gavin Brindley last season. Somehow he fell to 34th. We've seen it with, you know, a handful of other players. Stanislav Svozil is another one that comes to mind. Fell all the way to the 3rd round somehow. The Blue Jackets seem to have a knack for picking up guys that, like I said, have kind of fallen through the cracks of the rankings. Do you think are the red flags for Eiserman enough that you think he'll fall that far, or are you pretty sure that he's gonna like maybe hit 11 or 12?
I think he probably goes in the top half of the first round. I think I've talked to him a couple of times over the last couple of years. He's a guy that hockey teams vibe with, if that makes sense. He's a hockey bro. He likes to get in there, talk shop, talk about scoring goals, ripping biscuits, all that stuff. Like he'll interview very well because of the personality that he has, the kind of confidence that he has in his game. And at the end of the day, like I said, teams love a goal scorer, love a guy that they'll look at him and they'll go, yeah, he misses some hits and he doesn't always do the right thing defensively, but he's showing a willingness to throw his hits. He's showing a willingness to engage physically. We can turn him into a super power forward, even if that's not quite his game yet. So I think teams are going to be kind of falling all over themselves to turn this kid into something he's not, or take him and go, he'll figure it out. Because that shot, that goal scoring, the knack for finding the back of the net really is just as elite as it comes, pretty much.
It feels a little bit like, and I'm going to make a comparison again that might not be completely correct, but when the Blue Jackets traded for Patrick Laine, there was this whole thing across the organization of, we're going to turn him into a power forward, we're going to turn him into a 200-foot player, and I'm like, okay, but he scored 40 goals as a 19-year-old or however old he was. Like, why not just have him as a as a goal scorer. And I kind of get the feeling that they might do this. Not the Blue Jackets, but whoever drafts Eiserman might be like, we can fix him almost. And so I guess my question is, what does he work on over the summer and like into next year to either elevate his game or stop him from becoming this kind of one-dimensional player that can only shoot the puck?
I think the biggest thing I'd work on if I was Eiserman is agility, skating, and just seeing the ice a little bit better. Get in the video room, watch a ton of tape, critique yourself, and be hard on yourself. I think he's got the skill and the talent. If he can learn to push the pace a little bit more, and that's why I think he needs to get a little bit better on his feet, a little bit quicker, a little bit more agile, push the pace, be a guy that dictates the game, because right now he has to let the game come to him because of his skill set. And I think if you're an elite goal scorer in the NHL, it's because you're dictating the game. It's because you're pushing the pace. It's because you're playing the game at an extremely high level. And that's how it is played today. It's at a high speed, high pace, high octane hockey. Cole Eiserman can play that at times, but he has to be carried to that point. I want to see him become a guy that can do a little bit more on his own, create his own shot a little bit more, and really just find that extra gear. And that's the thing I'd be telling him to work on if I was the team that drafted him, and if I get to sit down with him and break down some video over the summer.
Let's kind of wrap this up with more of a fun one. And this might require more thinking than just kind of an off the cuff answer, but who do you kind of have on your draft board at the minute that you think is either going to go way higher than you have him or way lower than you have him? Is there anyone that you have kind of either really high or really low, and you think that, oh, teams are going to hate this guy or teams are going to love this guy?
Berkeley Catton, because everyone seems to rank him outside of the top 10. In my opinion, he's one of the smartest players in the draft. He just understands how to play the game of hockey. There's an element of just play the effing game, I think some people say. And Berkeley Catton does that. He's a good shooter. He's a good playmaker. He drives play in transition. He does everything you want except be 6 foot tall. He's 5'10", and I'm not saying that he's Zach Benson, but there's some elements of that kind of just intelligent, understanding how to dictate the play game that Zach Benson plays with. And although we saw him fall outside the top 10, it's one of the very few players having success in the NHL this year out of that draft class. So I think that's a guy that would be interesting. Zeke Bouillon's going to be a guy that I'm very, very interested in, because right now he's my top defender on the board. And I think he does everything you want to see. He's so good defensively. He calms play down. He's showing an offensive side to his game. He's dictating play offensively, driving things from the back end for that Denver University team. But there are mixed reports. Is he 5'10"? Is he 6 foot? People say there's been a growth spurt there. I don't think he does a bad job of holding his own defensively. So I personally don't have a problem if he's 5'11" or 6 foot. But I think he's going to be an interesting name. One name that I am very curious about is a guy like Luke Misa, and he's in the mid-teens on my board right now. I've seen him outside the first round. I think Bob McKenzie's list had him in the 50s, maybe even 60s. This is an extremely high-skilled player, a little bit undersized, admittedly, but he plays the game with so much skill, so much pace, loves to create off the rush, loves to create in zone. I think there's a very dynamic offensive player there. But undersized offensive players always fall in this draft class. So while I may have him in the teens, I'm not going to be shocked if he's a guy that does end up going early second round in that Gavin Brindley mold, a guy that maybe goes 40th and ends up being a really high-end prospect over the next few years.
Yeah, so some spoiler alert for future episodes of this kind of profile series. I did text a friend of the show, Sam McGilligan, and was like, hey, who's the small high-energy forward that you love this season? And he was like, listen, let me tell you about Luke Misa. So we will be having Sam on the show to talk about Luke Misa at some point, and I'm very excited about that. But
Sam and I have had many conversations about Luke Misa, and if there's anyone out there that's going to give you all of the goodies on that kid, it's Sam.
Yeah, well, we did it with Gavin Brindley last year. I'm sure we did it with Frank Nazer the year before. Like, there's always a small high energy guy that Sam loves, and I'm like, you know what? We can talk about it for 45 minutes. I don't mind. If people want more prospect stuff, if people want maybe more of a nuanced look at Eiserman, then we can kind of give them in 20 minutes or however long this was. Where can people find you and your work online?
You can find me at the Hockey News for all my writing. You can find me on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari, and all of my game tape videos this year will be on Elite Prospects. It's a great home for them. I think it's going to be really fun to see what those game tape interviews and the breakdowns that I do with the players, looking at their own highlights and their own tape, we'll do on Elite Prospects and in that platform. So check Elite Prospects out, which will be starting soon, the Hockey News, and then find me on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari, where I'm always down to talk some draft.
And that's all I've got for today. Like I said, tomorrow we are going to be talking a little bit more about Jarmo Kekalainen. We're going to be talking about kind of the bad that he did. We obviously talked quite a lot yesterday about the good that he did. But I want to kind of get into the more recent Jarmo Kekalainen experience. And so that's going to be tomorrow's episode. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on our podcast platforms. We are over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. And I appreciate you guys for continuing to stick it out. Hopefully, the team is on the up now, and that means the podcast will be on the up as well. So shout out to you guys, shout out to the Blue Jackets, and have a good weekend. Enjoy the game tonight against the San Jose Sharks. Crossing my fingers for a win. But until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.